Welcome to the Blue Line Project, real talk from the front lines of American policing. We cut through the noise, challenge broken metrics, and focus on solutions that keep officers safe, communities strong, and justice real. Blue Line Strong. Here is your host, John Gabrielson.
Welcome to the Blue Line Project, and we've been gone for last week, and I was teaching class down in San Marcos, Texas, and we had a great week. We actually just graduated, I believe, 11 more certified crime prevention specialists at the Crime Reduction Institute, and I enjoyed having, we had 14 in this series, but some of them just took one or two of the classes. But man, it's always exciting to see, these young officers, these new officers into the world of crime prevention, crime reduction, community engagement, earn that crime prevention specialist. The test is not easy, and the curriculum we put together here at the Crime Reduction Institute, I believe, is probably one of the most challenging but most comprehensive programs in the state of Texas. And just so many things going on. I'm just so excited for those folks. Congratulations to them and what they accomplished. So I couldn't say it more. I know I took a week off. It's good to be back. I missed you guys. I missed this podcast. I miss being here and just talking with you about candid things revolving around policing. Like I said many before, we're not a political show. We're not here to give political opinion. We'll talk about tough topics, and today we're going to get a little bit into leadership. We've been kind of touching on it from here and there. This week we were supposed to have Chief Chris Vallejo from Topeka, Kansas, was going to come on the show. We had to push him back a week. He had to go out and was with some of his command staff doing some things out in Virginia, and then he had a couple other things that were pressing back at the department. So he and I are going to connect probably next week, and I want to bring you that episode. But actually, it kind of works out well because this episode really going to build for next week's episode as we talk about some of these things, some of the challenges he faced there in Topeka, being a brand new chief coming into a whole new culture. If you like what we're doing here at the Blue Line Project, please, like us, follow us, smack the bell on Rumble, follow the like button on YouTube or your favorite, channel that you're watching us on, favorite podcast platform. Yeah, please follow us, like us, share your friends. We're growing slow. It's slow, but we are growing and we're getting better. And I'm trying to bring better content. And you just make things outstanding and excellent, because we live in such trying times, and we live in some of the best times ever. But then we also live in really challenging times, as we see so much craziness going on around us, this world just in upheaval and unrest, and just so many crazy things. It's like a news cycle is like in one day used to be like 10 years. I remember growing up as a kid, my parents watching all the news channels and stuff. And I feel like the things that we were seeing back then are just tenfold today. But with that being said, I want to bring us back to the fact that we are truly living in some of the most divided times in modern history that I can truly think of. I mean, think about this. Think about how divided our politics is. We can argue about when did it start. I was growing up as a kid, and I remember, I had Democrats in my family, and my parents were Republicans, and I remember there being some, political discussions around the table as a kid. My grandfather was a dyed-in-the-wool FDR Democrat. My parents were more of that Reagan Republican, left the Democrat Party for the, Republican Reagan Revolution, and just listening to those conversations. But they might have had a divide on policy about where to go and how to do things, and tax policy and other policies. But there wasn't a sense of division. They still loved this country, and they still had a common sense of values and things that drew them together. And so you could have a political discussion, a disagreement, and move on. But today, I mean, we literally have friends getting rid of friends, family members kicking out other family members. I'm never talking to you again, because you support a politician, or, you support, Trump, or you don't support Trump, or you support Biden and didn't support Biden, whatever. Just the whole left, right paradigm is really amazingly divisive, and political violence and all these things it's just crazy, and it's unbelievable. But then we're divided on culture. Think about how divided we are just on cultural. Like, we can't even agree on some of the basic normal cultural values of men and women, and just all these crazy things, and just the stuff that we're dealing with, and the tensions that we have. And then think about all these tensions culturally that come into our departments, into our police departments, and the things that we have to deal with. So now we're dealing with activist groups, and we're dealing with, accusations of racial bias or systemic racism or whatever is thrown out there, whatever ism is thrown at us. And our police leaders today are really facing a struggle. Not only do they have to deal with internal conflict and bad data and all the other things that are going on inside departments, they're dealing with all the outside of departments and all the politics and the pressures from city councils and all the different stuff that they're dealing with. And so really, how do you do it? Because at the end of the day, leaders today aren't just fighting crime. They're truly having to navigate conflict, perception, and really eroding trust. Now, I will say there's a lot of positive out there. I've seen some polls recently that are showing there are some positives. I think we're turning a quarter. I think the pendulum is swinging back more towards the ideas of law and order. I truly do. But I believe that police leaders need to take a different approach. I believe that we have to have the utmost transparency, the utmost honesty, the must uphold integrity. But what holds leadership to steady when everything else is like shifting around it, let's say? The answer, I don't think, is just policy. I don't think policy can fix this. You can't look just at public opinion because public opinion isn't always right. I believe we have to go deeper. We have to go to something more enduring, something more timeless, human values. I talk so much about human values because we have lost touch with our human values. We're so focused on all these little things that divide us, we forget about what unites us. At the end of the day, we're all united around common values, or at least we should be, something that we all as humans, as men and women, we can agree on. And so in a lot of the leadership training that we put together here at the Crime Reduction Institute, and we have coming in our newest online class, I really break down the idea of servant leadership and what it is and how you move as a servant leader tells you how you are as a leader. You see, some people know how to manage, but it was told me by Chief Vallejo, who's going to come on the show hopefully next week. I remember sitting in his office, and he once told me, and he wrote up on the board, I'll never forget it. I was in there. I think Frank Creasy, my partner, was in there with me, and we were sitting there, and he says, gentlemen, he goes, here's two things. He goes, you manage things and you lead people. And I remember sitting in my chair. This was, back in 2019. And I was like, wow, that's deep. And how many people have we worked for that are managers, but truly aren't leaders? And I know we've touched on some of this in some previous episodes, but in the precursor to bringing on Chris Vallejo from Topeka, the chief there, and bringing on some others, I want to explore this topic this week a little bit deeper. I want to look at the values, justice and courage and prudence and temperance, integrity and charity. And I want you to first understand that these are not partisan. These are common ground that most people, I believe, still recognize and respect. Even when they disagree on everything else, I believe we can come back to all people want these things: justice, courage, prudence, temperance, integrity, and charity. So I want to start with this as we move into this first segment. Why do these values matter today more than even before? Today, trust in institutions is at an all-time low. I mean, I think COVID really did us a disservice in so many ways. I mean, people actually used to trust what they heard on the television from the media, from politicians, from, doctors that wear white coats and the quote unquote authorities. But they've been lied to so much, and trust in institutions has gone. I mean, think about the trust that we at one point would have given to, say, the FBI. And now people don't trust a damn thing they say. Or think about the trust that was given to news media, Walter Cronkite and all these, Dan Rather and all these men that I grew up with watching TV that sat there at the 6 o'clock news. And, my grandfather used to crack me up because, he would watch the news at, 6 on CBS, and then he'd watch the news at, 7 on NBC, and then he'd watch, it was funny because it'd be the same newscast on all three channels, just with three different individuals. But at least then there was a patina of reality, of nonpartisanship. But today we don't have that. So you have a loss of trust in law enforcement. You have things like George Floyd. However you feel about what happened there, I think it was a travesty all the way around. I think the law enforcement, I think Chauvin and them could have do things different. I don't think he's a murderer. That might be controversial. So if you're mad about it, I don't know what to tell you. But I also don't think they handled that situation totally correctly. But at the same time, they're dealing with a hardened criminal who had a criminal rap sheet that was just a violent and horrible person that we somehow glorified. I don't want to get off on that, but just think about what that did to law enforcement in general. And think about what happened to the Minneapolis Police Department there in Minnesota and how it just crumbled and fell apart. Or think about what happened in Portland with their police department, or in Austin with my police department. I mean, think about how much faith has been lost in law enforcement. It's truly declined sharply, and all the studies tell me this. But here's the thing, even Sir Robert Peel, you've heard me mention him plenty of times on this podcast, even he says that when trust erodes, crime reporting drops, community engagement drops, community doesn't trust the police, cooperation fades into the sunset, and public safety then suffers, and everyone suffers. And then what is a police leader now is facing? And I think about my own example here in Austin. They're facing low morale. Officers that are eligible to retire in my department are eligible at 23 years, right? Well, now officers are leaving at 20, either buying forward or they're hitting 20 and 55. And so they're finding ways to retire early. And when they hit their 23, when I first started as a police officer, it wasn't uncommon to meet officers who had, been here 26, 25, 24, 27 years. And now officers are hitting 23 and out the door. So you just have this eroding trust, this morale. You have intense scrutiny from the public. I mean, officers today, I was just having a conversation with Commander LaHood. We were working out this morning. And, we had this salient conversation about how different policing was when we started as rookies, because he's out of my cadet class. When we started as rookies and we hit the street in July of 2005, right after we graduated, starting in November of 2004 in the academy, thinking about when we hit the street and the FTOs that I had. I mean, all my FTOs had 5, 6, 7, 10 years. And today you've got rookies training rookies. And so you have this scrutiny level. Officers then feel afraid of getting indicted. In Austin, during riots, they indicted, 21 of our officers? And, he keeps trying to indict officers for every little thing. I mean, it's like we have this indictment. We've talked about this on other shows, but you just have this out of control judicial system that seems to not go after hardened criminals, but then goes after cops with a fury who are actually doing their jobs. And so that public scrutiny then affects it. And then your leaders have to step into this. So you have communities pulling in different directions. You have this dichotomy. So we have unstable times. So how do you address this? In this segment, why do these values then help that? Because I don't believe you can come with flashy strategies. I think we need to be data-driven, and I agree with that 100%. I had Joel Vargas on a few weeks ago, and that's what we talked about, data. And in fact, one of the things we're doing here at the Crime Reduction Institute is looking for ways to help smaller departments improve their data, and we're seeking to do that right now. And we're even looking at getting some grants and things like that to help us do that. But at the end of the day, we want to take and move beyond just a flashy strategy or a catchphrase and go back to common values of humanity. Like I said in the opening of the show, justice, courage, prudence, temperance, integrity, and charity. I believe these provide a consistent foundation. They don't shift. They don't shift with the political winds. They anchor our decision-making. They help rebuild respect and bring communities together. And that's what we want. We want to provide a foundation. So let's begin with integrity. What is integrity? Really, I would define it like this: being whole, consistent, and truthful in word and action. I also heard it once defined as doing the right thing when nobody was looking. To me, integrity, you either have it or you don't. And integrity is everything. Your word should be your word, and there is no room for anything other. And how does this affect, if you have a department or leadership that has a lack of integrity, what does it look like? Well, guess what? We have a real world example. Let's go to Houston Police Department. There was a case backlog in Houston. There were over 264,000 criminal cases that were suspended and had been suspended since 2016. And how are they marked? According to articles and things that I read, they were marked as lack of personnel. So in other words, you had 264,000 cases backlogged that were suspended starting in 2016, and they were marked as lack of personnel, which means we don't have enough officers. And this included serious crimes, cases that had victims that wanted answers but never got any. Can you imagine being a victim and not getting answers? You've been raped, you've been robbed, you've been assaulted, whatever it is, and you don't get answers and your case is suspended, lack of personnel. How do we get there? How do we become and fail the public to such an operation failure as that? I believe a failure like that is a breach of integrity. Victims are left abandoned, communities are questioned, department's honesty is also in question, and at the end of the day, the department and the officers in that department, credibility is absolutely taking a hit. Now, fortunately, you've had chiefs and things since then, and they're trying to turn that corner in Houston, Texas right now and get that unbacklogged. But what are the takeaways that I can do for my police leaders in leadership? Integrity means everything. Integrity means owning shortcomings early, communicating transparency, even when it hurts. Yes, even when it hurts. Courage and integrity will go hand in hand. We're going to touch courage here in a minute. But to have integrity takes courage. Integrity means aligning actions with the badge that you wear. You take up an oath to serve and protect, to uphold not only the Constitution of the United States, but here in Texas, to uphold the Constitution and the laws of the state of Texas, and to enforce those faithfully, fairly, without bias, across the board. If you're failing victims and saying we can't investigate your case because lack of personnel, then you're failing because you're abandoning victims. And in fact, we're facing this right now in Austin, Texas. I don't want to get into it because I don't want to get myself in trouble, but we are facing some of these. And our police leaders here in Austin, our chiefs, are faced with hard things and having to make hard decisions, especially when they're coming up against the wishes and the will of city council. When I retire, I'll talk all about it and share more, and that's a little while down the road. But we can't leave victims and communities behind. We can't have victims questioning a department's officer honesty. We can't have them questioning officers' credibility. So we have to figure out how to get the job done one way or the other and honor our commitments to the public. Now, we may honor those commitments. We may have to change and educate the public on how we need to make changes, but we need to do that by being transparent with full integrity, share the truth that we have a lack of personnel, but still figure out how to accomplish it and make these hard decisions. And this is where data can really come to the rescue, because if you start looking at the data, you start looking at your call response times, you start looking at your metrics and how you're actually doing things, you can start finding answers in your data. Maybe it's not a lack of personnel. Maybe it's bad investigations. Maybe it's not collecting evidence correctly. Maybe it's not following up correctly. Maybe you can't solve the crime, but maybe you send it to your community engagement crime prevention team so they can follow up. There has to be a solution, and I believe the solution to these problems is found in the data. That's why I'm so fired up and excited about data and how important it can be. But here, when we're not talking about integrity, I want to have a leadership takeaway for anybody that's listening. Integrity means owning shortcomings, right? Early communication and transparency. It aligns with everything that you do, just like we talked about. So I want you to take this moment and think about a recent decision in your agency. Did you or your team communicate the full truth quickly, even when it was uncomfortable? Ask yourself that question. What would practicing deeper integrity look like in your next conversation or public statement that you have to give? Take a moment, reflect on that. I can't answer those questions for you. You have to answer those questions by digging down deep. Where is your integrity going to lead you? You going to tell the whole truth, even if it hurts you? Are you willing to stand up for what's right, even if it costs you your position? Tough questions. I'm not going to give you the answers. This is a time for you to think and reflect. Remember I said integrity ties into courage? It absolutely does. So I want to quickly look at courage. Now, oftentimes we police officers, we see courage as bravery on the street, running to gunfire. But in leadership, in servant leadership, I want to talk about moral courage in the face of pressure. That's where the rubber meets the road. Because to have moral courage means you might lose your job. Having moral courage means you might get made fun of. Having moral courage has consequences that could be devastating. Are you willing to step up and do what's right and show integrity? And I have a great example from the real world. Let's go back to Minneapolis and the leadership challenges after 2020. Now, I want you to think about where they were. If I read the stories right, I believe that Minneapolis at the time of George Floyd had around 900 officers. I believe they fell close to 500, give or take. That is a huge loss. What do you think happened when that happened? They were facing surging crime. Officer morale was in the tank, and there was massive turnover. These police leaders in that police department were under intense political pressure, pure public outrage, and a national spotlight, poof, right on them. This required courage. They had to resist two things. Number one, react purely to the activists and the tragedy that happened, and then balance that with public safety, which means they had to have some kind of a core principle, which they did. They actually built the chief there when he came in, the new chief, he built the department. He took and did training on procedural justice, which is outstanding, giving people a voice, right? Being trustworthy, and all these different facts, the 4 pillars that we talked about of procedural justice, absolutely huge, right? So he brought in procedural justice. And then they built better community relations. And when they put the two of them together, they're having more success there in Minneapolis today. They had to make the right call, even when both sides criticize you. Because here's the thing about a leader. A good leader is going to take criticism from both sides. And sometimes being a leader of courage means you're on the hill all by yourself. You're standing there alone, taking that position of integrity based on courage. So you have to make the right call even when you're being criticized. In reality, it's choosing principle over popularity and protecting your people while serving the community. It is a balance that you have to give as a police chief, commander, in leadership. It's just something that you have to do. Honestly, it's one of the reasons I don't ever want to be a police chief. I literally look at folks that I know that are chiefs, and I see the stress and the pressure that they're constantly under. And really, we should be praying for our chiefs every day. We have good chiefs out there. We have bad chiefs out there. But either way, they have a thankless job. Nothing they do is right because the decisions they can make, if they really side with their troops too much, then they get pushed back from politicians. If they go too far to the politicians, then they get pushed back from the troops. So it's constantly finding that balance. But to find that balance, you have to have integrity, number one. And two, you have to have the courage to do what's right and take that moral stance, even when it's the tough thing to do. So I want to talk again about a reflection, because this show is about you thinking. It's not about me lecturing you. When was the last time you as a police leader pulled in the opposite direction by different groups? What did you do? How did you react? What would it look like for you to demonstrate moral courage in that situation today? And maybe you did. What if you knew the moral courage would cost you everything or cost you short-term support? What would you do? I want you to think about that. It's a tough question. I can't give you the answers. I just want you to think. So we've talked about integrity, we've talked about courage, and now I want to talk about justice. Justice means fairness equally applied. I want to say that again. Justice means fairness equally applied. That is why you have what we call procedural justice, because in procedural justice, you're giving people a voice, which means you're listening to what they have to say. You're being trustworthy in your actions, right? You're doing those things that you need, to get done to build trust. That's what you're doing. So let's look at a real world example of a wrongful conviction when things were done right. Andrew Malkinson case in the United Kingdom. Malkinson, he spent 17 years in prison for a rape he did not commit. Key evidence was overlooked and the real offender remained free. Think about that. They overlooked real evidence and convicted this guy wrongly, and he spent 17 years in prison. Do you know how he got out? DNA later proved his innocence. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a profound failure of justice that damaged public faith for decades. Let's put it in a U.S. context. Let's bring it back across the pond. 2015 DOJ investigation, Ferguson, right? The whole Michael Brown situation. There was a lot of nonsense. Hands up and don't shoot never happened. However, the federal government went and did a patterns and practice investigation and found that there was many things that they were doing related to revenue and other things that was driving the way they did policing. So those things were eroding public trust. Then in walks the Michael Brown incident. You already had a lack of public trust, and then boom, there you go. So you had unconstitutional practices that had already bred resentment. The shooting happens, and we know the rest of the story. What did that do to policing in Ferguson? It made it even more difficult. Now, fortunately, after the DOJ and a bunch of changes, again, they, like Minneapolis, they got back on the right path and are headed in a good direction. But what are the leadership takeaways that we can get? Justice demands consistency. It's one of the things that I was in several meetings today, talking about housing here in Austin and redoing some things. And I'm on this, I guess, group that's helping and advising, I guess you could say it, like an advisory committee. One of the things that I had brought up about some of the stuff we were working on was consistency. If you don't have consistency, you are by nature not fair. If you are by nature not fair, that means you're the opposite of justice, you're injustice, because you have to apply things equally across the board. When you're talking about, for example, housing, HUD sets rules. One of the things HUD looks for is do you apply these fair? Are you being discriminatory? Are you following the tenets of the Fair Housing Act, right? If you're not, you're found to be in violation. You're going to end up getting sued. So you have to be consistent and have consistency, and you have to keep things the same. One thing Chief Acevedo did when he came to Austin, which I thought was really good, about consistency to an internal affairs, it used to kind of be a stick your finger in the wind, right? Per policy. Well, he actually created a disciplinary matrix so that you knew, hey, if I did this, this is what my expected penalty was be, right? So for Matt, if you lied, you knew you were going to get fired. But in between, there were all these different things. It was a matrix, and you could follow it, and you could know where it was going. And so it bred consistency. That's the first part. The second part is transparency. You have to have transparency. You have to get things out to the public. And I will say a thing that we're doing an awesome job in Law Enforcement Day is getting body cam footage out. Think about it. Officer incident happens. It catches on your body cam. Departments are great at getting that out. So that's awesome. And then equal application of the law, which goes back to what? Procedural justice, right? Giving people a voice, be trustworthy in your actions. Those are the two things that I really want you to take away from that. Giving people a voice, being trustworthy in your actions. The rest of the four will all fall in place for you. So justice, command, consistency, transparency, and equal application. When people believe the system is not that or playing favorites, they stop believing in the system, which goes back to the point I made earlier in the show. Why do we have eroding trust in the media, the medical community, politicians, the FBI, and other law enforcement? It's because people are losing faith in the system because the system keeps lying to them. The system keeps playing favorites. The system keeps changing. Leaders have to rebuild this faith. How do they do that? Ensuring fairness visible in every decision they make. Every decision they make has to be visible, has to be transparent, critically important, right? You have to be integrity, you have to be honest, you have to have courage, and now you have to have justice, because that is the key takeaway, being fair and equal in your application. Okay? People have to be able to believe in the system. I want you to think about something. Look at your department policies, your training, and recent incidents that you've had to deal with as a police leader at whatever level leadership you're in. Are there any areas where fairness might be questioned? Let's start with your officers. Think about that. I can't answer that question, but think about something you made a decision. Was it fair? How are your officers? Then I want you to think about what decision you made to the public. Could there have been a question of the fairness of that decision? Even if it was unintentionally, I want to throw that in there. Make sure that you're thinking and covering all the bases. So think about this. What step then could you take this week to make justice more visible and consistent and transparent in your daily routine and with the officers whom you serve as their leader? And going back, remember, you want to lead your officers, not manage them. You want to lead them and not management, and it starts here. Now I want to get this next one. We talked about justice, we've talked about integrity, and we've talked about honor, we've talked about courage. I want to talk about temperance. So temperance is self-control and emotional discipline. And I don't believe that there's ever been a more important time that this idea of temperance has been more vital to police leadership, or really in leadership in general. Because self-control and emotional discipline really changes the way we operate and the way people see you. And think about this. When you don't do that, you're making one of two choices. When you're in a pressure situation, I was reading a book and I had it described to me like this. Are you responding or are you reacting? I want you to think about the difference between the two. If you're reacting, that means you're allowing emotion rather than self-control or emotional outrage to control you and run that response. Versus responding, which means you're slowing down, thinking about what's been said or what's happened, formulating a response, and then responding. And think about the world that we live in today. Everything is about outrage, whether it's a viral video, social media, competing narratives. Everything is an outrage, and constantly keeping people in this turmoil and just responding. But it's not actual response. It's reaction based on some propaganda. So we as leaders have to step back and understand and take this word temperance so importantly. It is what is the mark of every leader. I mean, I think back to the greatest leaders in American history, whether it was George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, just those two alone. Lincoln dealing with the Civil War and all the things that he had to do. And think about how much self-control and discipline he had to show when he was trying to save this Union, when he had an entire side of this Union in outright rebellion on the Confederacy. Or think about George Washington and all the losses he had been taking on the battlefield and crossing that river in Valley Forge and going through all of that, the self-control and emotional discipline he had to have to get through that. And those are just two classical examples from history. I could give so many more. We have to understand that we live in this engineered society, like I said a few minutes ago, about moral outrage. So what are some real world examples? Well, the national policing tension's high-profile incidents spread instantly. One unchecked reaction can damage an entire department's reputation and instantly reduce cooperation for years. So all the research is confirming this, that these national policing tensions are killing us. They're taking away from good police leadership, taking away from good policing and turning things into everything being a moral outrage. And we see it on the immigration issue. Oh my gosh, you would I mean, I guess you can believe it because we're all living it. But can you just believe the moral outrage people have over criminals being arrested and deported who shouldn't even be in this country? And you would think that we were like the Third Reich, putting people in gas chambers. I mean, it's absolutely insane to the level of insanity that we have reached as a society. And in policing, like I said, it's no different. We have this just incredible tension that's built because of the mistrust. And so temperance means we have to be able to de-escalate. We have to be able to bring people down when provoked. One of the things that I think we're doing a better job in policing is de-escalation training, teaching officers to de-escalate, to use officer presence, to use their words to de-escalate. One of the things when I was on the street, I was in a few fights here and there, especially when I was on 6th Street working the bar district. But really, overall, I wasn't in a lot of fights because I knew how to talk to people. I would talk to them as if they were my family, show them respect, give them a voice. Does this sound familiar? Be trustworthy in my motives, and then be fair and equal in how I carried out what I needed to do as a police officer. And this was what I operated on the whole time that I was on patrol. And I still operate on today as I work in community engagement and crime prevention. It's all about de-escalation. We don't want to use force. We want to try to talk the situation out, even if someone is provoking us. And that's something you have to do as a police leader. You have to maintain your professional composure. Hey, I said, if you know me, I have a short temper. I really can. I can fly off the hook and get really, really upset. But that's not a good thing. Something I've been working on a lot is to really be more temperate in my response, slowing down, as I read in the book that I just read recently on masculinity and leadership, talking about slowing down and not reacting to a situation, but rather seeing the situation, taking that moment of pause, thinking it through, and giving a clear and concise response. Remember, a leader does not just manage an incident. They set the entire emotional tone. They set that tone for their officers, but more importantly, for the public that's watching. And so I love watching good police leaders after an incident get up and just say, hey, this is what happened, in a very calm, clear way. And it just cuts through. One of the things I thought Chief Acevedo did such a great job when he was a chief here in Austin was do that. I thought he had a really good way of just cutting through the noise and being clear and concise. So when we're talking about the leadership value that I want you to take away is I want you to think about the de-escalation, keeping that professional composure and being calm under pressure, because that's what your troops want to see and that's what the public wants to see. So I want you to take a moment to reflect. We've kind of been doing this throughout this podcast, and I want to do it again here. I want you to recall a high-stress moment in the last month. How did you or your leaders respond? Did you respond emotionally? Did you react? Or did you step back and respond with emotional discipline and self-control? And then I want you to think about another question. What practical habit could you build to strengthen temperance when the next provocation hits? So this is something you have to work on daily, something you have to walk through, live out, and constantly work on. Life is a journey. It's a journey of growing, and you never stop growing. If you ever run into a person who says they're not continually growing or trying to fix themselves, you're either dealing with some kind of a narcissistic, or you're dealing with somebody that's super ignorant. You have to always be growing and learning. It is what it is. It's a growing process. We always are growing and becoming better. And as things come our way, a good leader reflects and then takes what he has learned and applies it. Because what we do out there as police officers is dangerous. We get up in the mornings, we put on that uniform, and we go out there and we serve. And the reality is you never know when you're coming home. But that's what we signed up to do. And we have to be tempered in our responses, and we have to be emotionally stable in who we are as individuals. So in talking about these different things, we've talked about integrity, we've talked about justice, we've talked about temperance, we've talked about honesty and integrity And now I want to talk about prudence. Here's another word. Temperance and prudence kind of go hand in hand. It's the best way I can say it. You really can't have temperance without prudence, prudence without temperance. Prudence is a virtue, and I would kind of give it this definition: thoughtful judgment. Prudence equals thoughtful judgment. What do I mean by that? That means slowing down to think about the long term instead of the reaction. So temperance is the emotion discipline to do it. Prudence is the thoughtful judgment you need to have that tempered response, if that makes sense. And in this show, I've been kind of talking about real world examples, and I want to give you another one. So policy shifts under pressure in many departments, right? They face rapid changings. They're driven by immediate demands rather than careful study. And oftentimes we make knee-jerk reactions. Heck, I've lived that with Austin PD. I can't tell you how many times I've seen something happen and bam, knee-jerk reaction, and we're doing or changing a policy. I said in the very first episode that Chief Acevedo had a policy of not being able to tase a fleeing suspect. And we had a series of knee injuries, including one of my own that almost ended my career. But as a result of what happened to me and those other officers, Acevedo actually went back, changed the policy. But how often are leaders prudent in their decision making and willing to take ownership, in extreme ownership, as I've learned in other leadership classes, and be a person of integrity and courage and say, hey, you know what? Maybe we need to relook at this. Maybe this wasn't a carefully thought out strategy. Maybe we weren't prudent and tempered in our decision making. We knee-jerk reacted. And so if you take that approach, then your debates over like restructuring and resources and shifts and safety models become better received. And I'm really looking forward to talking to Chief Alejo, because we talked a little about this at his time up in Topeka since he's been there. And I want him to expand about some of the things that he did, because like I said, he's the one that talked to me about leading people and managing things. But too often we're managing people, right, that work for us. And so I wanted to talk to him about where he sees this, and I'm really looking forward to that, because what we don't want to do is create confusion and instability. And when you rush and do knee-jerk reactions, that's what you create. And a true leader actually creates the opposite, because a true leader has courage, temperance, and prudence, is a person of integrity, and therefore they build stability rather than instability. They build trust rather than distrust, and then people can trust them, both officers and the public. That's the leader I seek to be, whether it's running this company or whatever it is I'm doing, or running the crime-free housing program in Austin, Texas. Whatever it is I'm doing, that's how I want to take my approach, to prudent and temperate with integrity and courage, so that I'm doing the right things. So what is the leadership takeaway? We've had this kind of pattern going. So again, I want you to stop, reflect, and think. Prudence means weighing consequences, balancing reform with stability, and avoiding decision based solely on the loudest voices. So what does this look like for you as a leadership takeaway? Well, I believe a good leader asks the following question: what will this mean 5 years from now? Yes. Ask yourself the question: this decision that I'm making right here, this policy, this reaction, this news conference, or what I'm going to say, what will this mean 5 years from now? If it's going to have a huge meaning 5 years from now, it's probably something we should be doing. If not, maybe it needs to be reconsidered or restructured or looked at. Think about that. I want you to think about, what will this decision mean 5 years from now for this department, for my officers, and to the public? So I want you to consider a current policy debate or proposed change that's happening within your agency right now. What is something within your agency that is a debate or a heartache or a point of dissension among your officers? Some change that you're wanting to bring about in your agency? Ask yourself this question. If you apply to prudence right now, what question would you have to ask yourself before moving forward with that decision? How might a long-term view change your recommendations or your thoughts upon that particular subject? I just want you to reflect on that. Take a quick moment and reflect, because I think it's critically important. As we're coming down here to the closing moments, I want to bring us to charity, which I believe is one of the most important attributes or virtues that we can have as human beings, but as police officers. and that's charity. Charity is not just financial giving, it's goodwill, it's compassion, it's service to others. When you think about the classic statement, protect and serve, what is at the core of that statement? Charity. Charity is one of the greatest things you can do. I've told this story before. I don't like to talk about a lot of the things that I do because I try to be a person that has compassion, that meets the needs of others. I'm not always perfect at it, but there's been several incidences in my career, and I think there's several that stick out to me, but the one that I want to talk about here is I was working patrol. I was by myself. I don't even remember what day of the week it was, and there was a Chick-fil-A where in my district that I worked, and I knew that they didn't charge us. They were very friendly. The management and ownership there was very friendly to us, and they took really good care of us. And so I was there, and I went in to eat, and I was waiting in line. There was a family in front of me, and it was a mom and a dad and three children, and you could tell that this was a big day. It was very special for them. They were here, and the kids were excited to go play on the jungle gym and stuff. And I remember the dad turns around and he says to me, he goes, "Hey, we would really like to buy your meal." And in that moment, I looked at them and I saw them, and something inside of me said, "Man, this is a really stretch for them." I think the better thing to do was me to buy their meal and bless them in a compassionate, goodwill way. And so I said, "You know what? I want to buy your meal for your family." And the father just looked at me and was like, "Really?" Yeah, no, I really do. I want to buy the meal for y'all if you would allow me to do so. And the mom had a tear in her eye and she said, "Thank you so much. You just don't understand how much this means to us because of what we're going through right now." And that's all she said. I don't know what they were going through. I don't know why God led me to do that, but he just laid it on my heart that that's what I needed to do, that was an act of service that was there. And it was a great honor and a pleasure to buy those people their meals. And so charity is at the core of what we do as law enforcement. I know there's stories of officers of giving people water and doing amazing work. And I think some people overlook how much charity really happens and where the true police officer's heart really is. We don't get into law enforcement for any other reason if you listen to oral boards because they want to help others. And we feel this is a way we can do it. Yes, we enforce the law and the foot pursuits and the chases and the arrests and the fight. All that's great. It's fun. Don't get me wrong. My 21 plus going on 22 years in November has been absolutely amazing. That's what I can tell you. But what I can also tell you is that most officers have a big heart and they have and contribute and do acts of charity. We've been giving real world examples, and I want to talk about another one, Beaumont Community Coalition there in Beaumont, Texas. Mayor Roy West created a coalition against violence where he brought police and schools and families and faith groups and stuff together to fight youth violence. And what was the bedrock of this program? It was mentorship, volunteer training. They learned and talked about shared responsibility among police department and the community. And instead of sitting in a bunch of cushy chairs talking about things, they turned talk into action. And by turning it into action, they were protecting kids, strengthening neighbors, getting people involved. And that program has been a great success according to the stories and things that I read about it. And Beaumont's not a huge town, but it's down there on the coast. It's a bunch of oil there, and this is really cool. Like something that really needed to happen. That's charity in action, right? Seeing the community not as adversaries, but as partners, deserving care and investment. And to me, that is why I do community engagement. That's why I love being a district representative, because as a district representative, I get to help people, work with people, and see people in a different light, and truly be there, not as that, hammer of enforcement of the law, but that person that can do this. And so I think the leadership takeaway that I would take to this is, what does charity look like in policing? And I think it is engagement. I think the way we engage in charity is our community engagement programs. I have a saying, community engagement with a purpose. We engage the community not just to engage, but we engage the community to reduce crime and empower them. I also like to call it the abundance mentality, building people up, right? Building up the individual, because when you build up the individual, you build up the community. And like President John F. Kennedy said, a rising tide raises all boats. Well, how do you do that? You do that through mentorship. You do that through treating people with dignity and respect. You do that by modeling what we teach. You do that by empowering people to educate themselves. That's how you do it. You build a sense of community. One of the ways that I remember doing this in my own self, and I guess it kind of goes along the line with charity, but where I saw community come together was there was, a false, I guess, theory going around that Asian people were, being, uh, beaten up and abused and hit and assaulted or whatever by white supremacists, right? It was a big thing happening back during the COVID era. And really, that's not what was happening. I'm not going to get into the politics of it. But I was asked to go speak at a community meeting with a bunch of Asian leaders. They wanted me to address this issue. Well, I spent the first, 5 to 7 minutes saying, hey, these are the different cases. There's no cases in Austin, but these are the cases that they're talking about. I never talked about who the suspects were. I just showed them these are the cases. And I laid them up there. Then I explained to them what a hate crime was and a couple of that. So, but what I want to spend the bulk of this meeting on is empowering you guys and teaching you how to protect yourselves. So we're going to pivot and we're going to talk about personal safety. And in that moment, I truly engaged them, and I wanted to take their fear and turn it into action and act as a mentor and give them something they could take away to apply to their own lives. And the meeting took an entire turn, and it was really an awesome experience. And so to me, engagement, education, mentorship, treating people with dignity, that is a leadership quality that then presents charity more than just goodwill and giving people things. And here's another thing I want you to think about as we close in charity. Do I have to agree with somebody politically to show them goodwill? How many times in this political divide do I hear people, they're this, I hate them, you're the evil, you're bad, you're this, and all goodwill goes out the window because they have a differing political opinion? I can't solve all the world's problems, but what if we step back and actually showed goodwill? I think that's one of the things that we're missing in society as a whole, and probably could do a whole podcast just on goodwill. But you as a leader, when you model true charity and you demonstrate it with your troops, you demonstrate it with the community, what does it ultimately do at the end of the day? Charity humanizes the badge. It invites cooperation. And that to me is the most important thing that we want, to cooperate and work together with the community. So following the trend at each point throughout this podcast, I want you to take another reflection moment. I want you to think about one community group or individual you had tension with as a police leader. I want you to think about what would a small act of charity or goodwill look like from your leadership position? And how can you start building that bridge today or this month? I want you to think about that. I want you to reflect on it, because these things are so important. These values and virtues that we've just laid out over the last 45 minutes or so, to me, are the core of servant leadership. And if you can master these, you are a servant leader by nature. There's lots of awesome leadership courses out there. APD has a really good leadership course. I went through with Extreme Ownership, another good leadership course, great book. You should read it. But these things are the core principles that we have to live by. Let's just face reality as we close. We as a society, I do not believe that we are going to return to a less divided society at any time soon. And that's a hard truth and reality we're just going to have to face. The political divide right now is such a huge chasm. I don't know when we're going to return. But I want to talk about what leaders can control. You can uphold these standards, these virtues, and uphold them and live them out and encourage others to do the same. Bring these to your department and make it a part of all of your training so that we're all getting on the same page. That's number one. Number two, As police leaders, you cannot change your opinion because of a narrative change. The reason people are losing trust is because people don't have a solid foundation and they can't trust you. They can't trust your word because you're constantly moving. Once you stake a claim and that is your opinion, unless there is new evidence or new data to change you that would weigh how you made that decision, then you need to stay with that so your narrative doesn't change. And then I'm calling you now and calling myself and holding myself to the same standard. We need to live out justice. We need to live out courage. We need to live out prudence. We need to live out temperance. We need to live out integrity and charity day after day after day. This is how we rebuild. This is how we close the chasm. This is how we do it. This is being procedurally just. You can't be procedurally just, giving people a voice, be neutral in your actions. You can't do that being trustworthy in your motives. You can't do that unless you have these as your core values of leadership. Remembering your goal as a leader is not to manage, but to lead. To lead is tough. You have to be able to be honest. You have to be steadfast. You have to have a calm strength, a wisdom, and be compassionate. These are the things that make a leader a leader. These are things that I personally am working on every day. I don't get it all right. I fail. You're going to fail. I'm going to fail. But what do we learn from that failures? What do you take from your mistakes? Do you take your mistakes and then move and do better and grow? That's what you need to do, or you're doing something else. Leadership, in my opinion, in policing today has never been harder at any time in human history. To my police leaders out there, you are guiding your troops, your people through the noise, the pressure, and the divisions that this society is creating. I don't want you to ever forget what I believe is your and my unshakable anchor, these classic values. These values never bend to politics. They never bend to polls. They never bend to social media. They remain steady and should be the rock, the core, the foundation upon which you're built, because their core and foundation is found in natural law itself. In a world that feels uncertain, people will follow leaders who are constant and consistent in their leadership. People don't want perfect leaders. They don't. They want people that are real, authentic. That's what they want. And to be real and authentic, you have to be consistent. Consistency is the key. If you're not consistent, you're not real, you're not authentic. And people are going to see through the BS in a moment. You have to be who you are all the time. And if you're not doing these things, then you need to take time and practice these things and live it out. So in closing, I want you to live out justice, live out courage, live out prudence, live out temperance, integrity, and charity. Because trust is not built with slogans. It's rebuilt through values demonstrated over time. These truths we take with us, and I hope that you have learned something from this podcast. I feel this has been an important podcast. I think this really sets the stage for guests that I have, because I'm going to flesh out some of these topics that we just talked about here with Chief Vallejo when he joins us in a couple weeks. But take these things, live them out, practice them. If you want to know more, go to our website, crimereductioninstitute.com. I have a leadership course there right now that you could take online, and I have a promotion going. If you want to take that course for free, Chiefs 2026, and you can take that course, go to the course, sign up to get a student account, log in, register for the course. At checkout, put in code Chiefs 2026. You could take that course for free. We talk about these and so much more in that very inexpensive, I believe very powerful course that we put together here at CRI. If you like the podcast, like and follow, hit that like button, hit that bell, follow us, tell all your friends. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Rumble. We're there on all the major podcast platforms. I love seeing you guys. I can't wait till next week's episode. This weekend, just so y'all know, I'm going to be going watching cars turn left. The wife and I are headed out to Birmingham. I'll be out there. I'm going to be at Talladega watching my favorite cars, my favorite drivers. And it's going to be a great weekend, but I'll be back with you next week. Hopefully we'll have Chris Vallejo here, the chief of police of Topeka, Kansas, and a personal friend of mine and mentor. Please like and follow us. This is John Gabrielson signing off for the Blue Line Project. See y'all next week. Remember, be Blue Line strong.